Hello, everybody. I'm Zenith, and welcome back to the Disney Debate, where Kat Mac and I talk about Disney products and Disney in general. So, how's it going today, Kat?
I'm excited.
Excited?
Excited!
I'm excited. We are very excited today, because today is the big event, the 1940s Retrospective.
Yay!
This is the thing that our podcast has been culminating towards. We have finally covered a decade worth of Disney films. And that is quite an accomplishment, considering how much that Disney has put out.
Yes, and boy, what a turbulent decade it was.
What we're going to do to start off is, this is going to be kind of like an awards ceremony where we give, best film, best picture, best animated picture, and stuff like that. We have a bunch of awards to give out. But before we delve into the awards that we're giving to this decade, I want to go over each and every film briefly and talk about how we felt of them and how we felt of the decade overall, because this has been a very different period for Disney.
Right, and it was, of course, his starting point, since the majority of his most popular things came out in this time. And, of course, like with any new director, actor, company, the first stuff that they put out is either really, really good or really, really bad. So,
it's a case of when you're first starting out as a filmmaker and a film producer, you're feeling the waters out, you're testing things out, and it's really hard to replicate success. And it's really hard to replicate success multiple times and keep that success going. And as we see here with Disney, they were able to do a lot with their early films. And while they did not have a lot going for them in the latter half of the decade, really, a lot of what Disney stands for was made in this decade, and in the beginning of Disney in general. So let's talk a little bit about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, that was not in the 1940s. That was the only film that came out in the 1930s, which is why we didn't have a decade like Retrospective. And it was Disney's first animated feature, and so on its own, it's really hard to take a look at the Disney Corporation and see where they're going to go from that. It's much easier to take a look at how they are in a 10-year time span. But Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, I'd say, was a very strong start to Disney. It wasn't really a technical achievement in terms of storytelling, in terms of stuff like that. It wasn't a huge achievement in terms of character development and plot. But the thing is, this started what Disney was all about. It was adapted from a children's storybook written by the Brothers Grimm, and they took this storybook, it was a very short children's book, and they made a feature-length film out of it. And that in itself is an achievement, but also they managed to make the world's first animated feature film, something that no one thought was possible. And in terms of animation, in terms of the quality of everything going on, it was a very impressive achievement for them.
Yeah, extremely. The Snow White pretty much set up everything, that would go right for Disney, both in terms of, their stunning animation, their memorable characters, their, creative adaptation of existing stories. It really was the perfect film to start with. And true, while it had its issues and the same formula would later be perfected in other films, this one served as, like you said, the first stepping stone towards their success and towards finding their groove and the formula that worked for their company.
And it's what allowed Disney to continue making films like this. If it wasn't for Snow White, none of the rest of the films that Disney made would have been possible in terms of budget and in terms of, technical quality, because they really tried a lot of new things with this. However, one thing to note about this 1930s, the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs decade, is that they didn't have an emphasis on songs or music as much as you might think of Disney. Now, there were several songs included in Snow White, but of them, only two are really memorable. And the thing is, there wasn't an emphasis placed on it. They were just, I think a lot of the songs were put in to pad for time and to allow the film to reach running time.
Yeah, I remember the songs a little bit better than you do. I know a couple of them still are pretty popular, but it does feel like it's a bit shoehorned in. But then again, since Disney was pretty big on making, musical shorts and silly symphonies, it wasn't exactly, hard for them to make music for this and, actually make it fit. So while it's true the songs aren't, definitely not the best, they still have their mark, they have their place, and they don't seem, irrelevant at all.
So it was, in essence, it was a very firm start for Disney, and it started a lot of the creative traditions that Disney would use throughout their films. Now, fast forward a few years and to the 1940s, and Pinocchio comes out.
Oh, this film.
Now, Pinocchio was not the smash hit that Disney needed. It was not as well received as Snow White, and I think a lot of the problems come from the lack of focus. With Snow White, you kind of had a very clear goal in mind. You had, it was adapted from a storybook, yes. It just like Pinocchio was adapted from a storybook, but Pinocchio feels more chapter-esque, whereas Snow White feels like a more shorter story, where you have, Pinocchio, he's going around on different adventures, and there's no one single villain. There's quite a few villains in the Pinocchio story, and none of them get their comeuppance at the end.
Yes, this was a very, very dark film. Like, very dark. And I know, like, some Disney films, some would get a lighter tone in the coming years, other about as dark, maybe not quite as much, but this one definitely set a more, I dare say, mature tone, which is surprising for this being Disney's second film. And I think that's what put a lot of people off, is the fact that, they kind of mix the theme a bit. It's like, oh, you have this cute, lovable little puppet who wants to be a real boy, and then he gets thrust into a world of booze and cigars and demon coachmen and kids turning into donkeys, and becomes suddenly and a giant freaking whale that eats people. And then suddenly becomes horrifying.
And now, like, the actual book that this is based off of is very dark. It's much darker than the actual film. They did Disneyfy it, but I think for a second film, it wasn't a good choice for Disney. And now Disney himself didn't want to do this for his second film. He wanted to do Bambi next. And so you kind of see a very spiritual connection between Snow White and Bambi, if you think about it.
Right. They're both, very, very lighthearted. A lot of it takes place in nature, and of course, the animals are a very big focus in both films, actually. So you definitely can see, you could definitely see the connection and, where Disney sort of had to, kind of stray from formula a bit, in order to take the time to make the film Bambi, a lot better than Snow White and his other subsequent films.
So I think, Pinocchio may have been a misstep in terms of sales. I still think in the end it served to showcase a little bit more different side of Disney. Because, yes, they do a lot of the kid-friendly movies, but they also focus a lot on making stuff that is accessible for both kids and adults. And I think that's what Pinocchio served. It was more aimed towards males. It was more aimed towards adults. And really, it was a film that went in a different direction than the previous one. That may not have clicked as well with audiences, but I still think it worked. Pinocchio is one of my favorite Disney films, I put it in maybe a top 25, but it's still a classic. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, I completely agree. Pinocchio will always be a classic, and it far outranks, a lot of other films that we're going to talk about. Just in my personal opinion, I mean, I admire the animation. I admire, the storytelling and how, they tried to make it not as dark as the book, but still keep the same theme and everything.
And there was a lot more focus on characterization and plot than on Snow White, certainly.
Right. But overall, that film still scares the shit out of me. So I will always have that bias.
And honestly, like the songs, like I said, there's in these early films not a lot are very memorable, but "When You Wish Upon a Star" is a classic. That's right there. So there is some memorable things to be had, but overall, I don't think it was good for the musical side of Disney.
True, but when you think about it, "When You Wish Upon a Star" was the only song they really needed, because that kind of became their theme song, per se. Pretty much Disney in a nutshell in what they're trying to convey to kids.
It's interesting. In this decade, in the 1940s, we have two songs that really exemplify what Disney was all about. The first is "When You Wish Upon a Star," and it showcases that, they're all about moral guidance and, thinking about, okay, being the right person and think about who you want to be, and making people's dreams come true. That's a lot of Disney philosophy right there. The second one we're going to be talking about in a little bit, but I think that's more exemplifies the true nature of Disney, I think.
Totally. I wholeheartedly agree.
The next film that they released was Fantasia, and as we all know, this was Disney's masterpiece. This was the film that he had been wanting to tell for quite a while, and he had to wait until he had the right technology. He fitted theaters with like special implementation just so people could get the full experience. He after Snow White, which was more an animation achievement, and Pinocchio, which was more storytelling achievement, Fantasia is just kind of an experience. And as he said, in Fantasia, they say there's like 3 different types of music. That's kind of like the way that the film structures worked for this, where there's 3 different types of films. Films that exist as an experience for their own sake, films that exist to just be enjoyed simply for certain aspects like animation, or films that exist, for intellectual purposes. And, in Fantasia, we get a really big experience.
Right. And what an experience it was. I mean, it's a shame that it was so underappreciated back in that day, especially, being that time period, because nowadays even though it is appreciated today, I don't think it would go over as well just because, classic music isn't as appreciated as it was back in the day. But it's still wonderful to behold. And it's definitely something, to be shown in every art class, every music class, any type of class. Because it's one of those top movies that you need to see before you die.
It's one of the Disney films. Like, if you don't see any other Disney film, you need to see Fantasia just for how different and how intriguing it is and how much it shaped the way that Disney would produce films in the future. And while they would try to replicate the success of Fantasia, they really weren't able to do that, unfortunately. They didn't have as much animators, they didn't have the budget, and, people just weren't into this type of art form. But honestly, this is the first film that Disney did that was not based on anything, not based on a book. And he took classic music that anyone at the time period had heard of, and he did something unique and so different with it. And it's a hard thing to really judge because every bit of this works.
Absolutely. However, an unfortunate downside to Fantasia is that it cost so much to make, and they made back so little that it pretty much nearly bankrupted the company.
It was simultaneously one of my favorite films of this decade, but then it brought about some of the worst films of this decade.
Yes, by the time Fantasia was done, animators were pissed off. They weren't getting the money they were promised. They were being overworked. There were strikes going on. So, of course, that led to a cut in the animation budget. And that led to one of the worst films of the 1940s.
The Reluctant Dragon. And yes, I will continue to bring it up. Even if I don't have to, even during the 50s, I will bring this film up because this basically sums up everything bad about Disney philosophy. And Fantasia symbolizes everything good about Disney philosophy. Fantasia is all about creativity and doing something new and exciting and trying to expand minds and, just embracing the inner child and imagination. The Reluctant Dragon is about getting money quick.
It's pretty much just, doing something with as little money and as little effort as possible. And this film is living proof of that.
The Reluctant Dragon is the precursor to the Disney sequel. It basically what it exists to do, it exists as a quick cash-in, get people into the theater, get their money, promise them something, don't deliver on it, but you still get your money back, so it's okay, because you didn't cost that much to make. That's what this is. It's basically a tour of Disney Factory with a few advanced cartoons, advanced viewing of cartoons sprinkled in, and then once you have that, you have like a final cartoon number that they made specifically for the film. But it was so lazy and had so little substance that it wasn't worth watching. It's the equivalent of these endless Disney sequels where we have you would constantly get the Fox and the Hound 2, Hunchback of Notre Dame 2. They have these really successful films, and if they're not getting enough money, they'd be like, okay, we can bang this out in a week. I can make Cinderella 5 in my sleep. Let's do that. And then let's put it on the market. And then people will buy it because Cinderella was so popular. This is what The Reluctant Dragon is. And it fails at everything Disney was good at. It fails at animation. It fails at storytelling and structure. And it fails at music because it doesn't have any music. Also, it fails at adapting a book. That's what Disney does best.
Yeah, so this is basically Disney's first big failure, and a pretty forgetful one at that, because while this film does exist in, some packaged DVDs, it's only the cartoon part. The rest of it, the whole live-action sequence before that, all the cartoons in between, nobody remembers any of it, and I doubt any of it can really be found, or if people want to even find it. So it's pretty much a really bad, forgettable film, but at the same time, it's so bad, it also, just gets stuck in your head about how bad it is.
It doesn't agree with me.
Yeah,
so that's one of the first blights on Disney record. But afterwards, Disney kind of pulled it together, and they created Dumbo.
Yeah.
And Dumbo was them saying, okay, we had a failure, let's make this work. And they trimmed a lot of the fat that you saw in Snow White and Pinocchio, and they cut the film down to about an hour length. And they really paid attention to every chapter of the book that it was being adapted to, and they basically made the movie kind of like you would make a book in chapters, and they made the script like that. And so the only scene that actually felt padded in this film was the pink elephant scene, and that was just, the animators having some fun.
Yeah, but for the most part, even though it was made mostly just to gain money back for the studio, it succeeds by going back to the normal formula, the one that Disney first started, and again, making good characters, trying to actually tell a coherent story, and that's where Disney starts to pick back up again.
Also, in the music department, we have the Flying Crows creating one of the best songs in this decade. Is "When I See an Elephant Fly," and that's one of those songs that you remember, and you remember the pink elephant sequence because it's just one of those things. It's so like unique and different, and it's what Disney was trying to do at the time. It's all about creativity, doing something different. And because Disney was so young as a filmmaking company, they were able to do a lot of this stuff.
Right. And what we got was one of the most memorable characters. We got some pretty nice songs. The Baby Mine was, I think, one of their first really emotionally driven songs, and it really hits home.
And Dumbo himself is the first Disney character who's silent. He's a silent protagonist.
Well, Dopey was too, but he wasn't the lead character. In this case, you had a character that said nothing, but conveyed so much emotion, so much passion just in his look, just in his actions, and it really spoke to, how good of an animation company Disney was just by what they could do with Dumbo.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't Fantasia level animation, but it was still damn good.
Mm-hmm. Very enjoyable.
And afterwards, Disney went on to create Bambi. Finally, this was supposed to be the second film that Disney was going to produce, but due to problems with animation and problems with technology at the time. They had to wait a little bit, and then halfway through making the animation for the film, the war hit, and this is the only animated feature that Disney actually continued production of during the war.
Yeah, that was how much he believed in it.
And while it wasn't as successful as Snow White and Dumbo was, honestly, this is his second masterpiece. It can be considered boring by some. I can understand that. But what it does creatively, what it does in terms of just creativity in general and imagination is just so amazing. It has a story that by all means should not work. It's basically a story about an everyman character growing up in the middle of a wood, and he's an animal. He's a deer. By all rights, this should not be interesting, but it is, because it's all about life, all about the struggles that we deal with in our life. And not everyone could get that. Not everyone will get that. But honestly, I really love this film, and it has some of the best animation Disney produced. I'd say it's on par with Fantasia in terms of the animation quality, and honestly, in terms of this decade, it's on par. Like, nothing else compares to it after this.
Exactly, because unfortunately, like you said, the war had started, so pretty much all of Disney's assets were either taken away or put into, war propaganda. So because of that, he wasn't able to spend money making feature-length films like he had for the past couple of ones. So, unfortunately, for the most part, we ended up with these package films.
And so for the first half, or not even half of the 1940s, up until 1942, we had Disney full-length feature films. Excluding The Reluctant Dragon, every film that Disney had produced up until this point was a feature-length animated film, and it was really big, it was really focused. Then you have the package film era, and that goes from the 1943 to 1949, and really it's a dark period in Disney history because during the war they didn't have the ability to produce a lot of these big features that they were going to do, and if it wasn't for like some of these features being okay or being pretty good, I don't think Disney could have bounced back from it.
Yeah, it's quite possible that that Disney could have just faded into obscurity at this point. But you could tell, despite some of the lesser package films, they still were trying. They were still trying to gain the money, still trying to improve their animation and technology and everything. And it does show in some of the skits, because the package films, while they do start off pretty bad or forgettable, they gradually get better.
And it seems like they learned from a lot of the lessons. However, the biggest achievement in terms of these package films is the new way they use live action with animation. And that was a major cost-cutting feature, but it was also very unique and very interesting to explore, especially at the time. And so, while I'm not a fan of a lot of these package films, they did some really cool things. First we got Saludos Amigos, and as we talked about, that was kind of a goodwill attempt. This was the second film that Disney made that was not based on a book, and it really shows. A lot of it is just, it feels like a low-budget Disney cartoon for most of it.
Pretty much.
And it's not that interesting. It showcases a lot of the characters we know, but not doing the things we know them to do. So I think it was a major misstep starting out like that, where you could have had any Disney cartoon and just slapped them in a different country, and it'll be a little bit more interesting, I think.
It would be, but then again, this was focused mainly to appeal to the people in South America, and for the most part, it succeeded. South America was introduced to the Disney Corporation. They learned about the cartoons and the movies that they were making, and that was a big factor in them siding with America during the war. So while it was definitely not good, it still served its purpose.
And it showed that Disney was interested, and America was interested in creating a partnership with these countries. And honestly, it was more a political film than anything. And as we all know, with Disney, political films are not very good.
No, they're not.
Speaking of political films, the next one, Victory Through Air Power, is very political. It is based on a book, but it's not based on a children's book like Disney usually, makes. Disney usually adapts children's books into movies, and this is a book definitely not aimed for children.
No, it is not. This is a movie that you will definitely never find, on its own DVD or online or on YouTube or anything like that by itself. This is one of those things that was meant to be in sort of, a later package film, that consists of a bunch of specials, a bunch of cartoons and stuff, and of course that's how I found it. It's mixed up with a bunch of, old Disney war propaganda cartoons and a few other shorts. And it definitely shows the time period that it was made, and it's
very dated.
Completely dated.
And its political agenda is basically, okay, let's take airplanes, get the best air force in the world, and take down Germany and Japan. That's the gist of the film. And it's hammered really hard into your brain. And for modern audiences, this doesn't make sense because, one, air power is kind of overrated in the fact of nuclear bombs. And really, we aren't at war with Germany anymore. In fact, at this time, we had passed the war with Germany. We had passed the Cold War with Russia. And now we were in Iraq. So, if anything, we wouldn't even need airplanes.
Yeah, it's one of those films that, in order to work today, would have to be heavily chopped up. Like, I think the only thing they can salvage is the early animation where they talk about the history of aviation, because that's still interesting to watch. It's educational, and there are some funny moments. And I think if they took that and then extended upon it, add like a follow-up to the history of aviation, then it might work today. But for the most part, it's one of those things that you kind of have to throw back into the vault. That it's one of those things that Disney probably should have had more hindsight for, thinking that, well, obviously this isn't going to, be relevant once the war's over, so we probably should just stick it away, keep it just for historical significance.
Mm. Now, the next package film that Disney produced was a lot less political and just plain fun. The Three Caballeros is basically Saludos Amigos done right. It has a story structure. It does have like little cartoons interspersed. However, it showcases why in the story. And in all honesty, the little cartoons don't distract from the main feature. And the second half of the film is just an acid trip, and it's complete unadulterated fun, wackiness, no logic apply. It's just, Disney animators having fun, just doing whatever.
And it was a real breakthrough in combining both animated characters and live-action characters together seamlessly in one shot. Because, you would think that, a company that was still as young as Disney was at this point, with animation being as it was and plus the budget that they were on, you'd think that this would turn out a lot crappier. Like some of the, a few earlier cartoons that tried, but it was obvious, that there was like green screen or like shoddy editing. In this case, it's very seamless, and the interaction is just perfect.
And honestly, like, a lot of really memorable moments take place in this film.
Yes, like Donald trying to get laid.
Or the three gay caballeros.
Yes, it's definitely bright and colorful, it's loud, it's fast, and
it's a little bit obnoxious.
True, it can cause sensory overload with how much stuff is thrown at you, and plus the sequences in between. Some go really slow, and it's kind of boring, and maybe even like takes you out of the movie a bit. And then others are just balls to the wall crazy, and suddenly you get all excited and hyped, and
it's not the best of the package films, but honestly, it's one of the most fun package films in terms of the sheer ludicrosity of everything going on.
Yeah, and you get a little education out of it. Because again, this was meant to appeal to, South America and even Mexico. And for the most part, it worked.
I'd say pretty much all of it worked, except for Pedro.
Yeah. But, those little cartoons, again, those can easily be, chopped up and put into their own little package films, a series of cartoons and stuff, and nothing would really be missed. But for the most part, like, despite the obnoxiousness and, the insanity it descends into in the third act, it's still a very enjoyable film.
And it shows that Disney was actually starting to think about how to make package films work. Now, with the next one, they tried a different approach. Instead of trying to make everything connected by a story, Make Mine Music is just a collection of little shorts. And in theory, this is a very genius idea, where you have a lot of people who, you like Disney shorts and you want some original Disney shorts that, they're really big into producing at the time. Where it fails is that a lot of these aren't good.
Yeah, a lot of because there's kind of a theme that goes with each of these, in that first they try to do an artistic piece, then they try to do a story piece, and then they just go back and forth. And the problem is, the art pieces in this, while some of them are, nicely animated, it's really boring.
And it's like you can tell they're trying to recreate Fantasia, but they're missing the point.
Yeah, the music doesn't sync up too well with the animation, and on top of that, they have, people singing instead of just, running a musical piece like Fantasia did. So you have just some person drawing in the background while a bunch of random shots of nature or items or whatever just appear and disappear, and it's, it does nothing to keep your attention.
And a couple of the segments are very frustrating and offensive. In fact, the one that they cut was cut for the wrong reasons. It should have been cut because of all the stereotypes and the stupidity of it all, but no.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that try to tell a story, some of them are okay. Some are cool to watch, and others kind of meh.
Meh, yeah. And unfortunately, that meh would continue when Song of the South was created. Now, I will give this. Song of the South is not a bad film. It's just kind of a boring film, and it was Disney's first real attempt at making live-action work on the mainstream. Like, it was the first majorly, almost fully live-action film that Disney did. And it was based on the stories that Disney had read as a child, the Uncle Remus stories. And so what he did here was kind of reverse the success of the Three Caballeros, where we have live-action characters interacting with animated characters instead of the other way around. And so you have, this really colorful character of Uncle Remus in bringing cartoon shenanigans into this boring, everyday, real world. And if you look at it from this perspective, if you look at it, okay, Song of the South is kind of supposed to be boring in one aspect. The real world is supposed to be a world that you want to escape from. And what Disney does here is creates a character that's overly cartoonish, overly in tune with inner childhood, and brings imagination to life and makes the real world less boring because of it.
And once again, the interaction between live action and cartoon, again, is seamless. And it's probably the most memorable part of the film, aside from a few other controversial things that I'm sure people will bring up.
I mean, we've talked a lot about the somewhat, the racist controversy before, so we're not going to really touch on that. As we said before, we don't think it's that racist, if at all. But one thing this film did do is they spawned one of the best songs of the decade, Zippity Doo Dah. And the thing with Zippity Doo Dah, as I said, with pretty much him and pretty much Zippity Doo Dah and Uncle Remus are the equivalent of Disney philosophy. Zippity Doo Dah as a song is all about looking at life and making everything much more fun. It's like, okay, you could look at it and say, oh, I'm having a bad day, but if you just change the way you look at things and you make life a game, make life full of fun and childhood imagination, much like Uncle Remus has, then you can make life so much more entertaining, so much better. Uncle Remus is very in tune with his inner child, and you always see him conversing with children in the film, and mostly, and the only adults that he converses with are kind of mystical, like he is. They're very respectful and very accepting of other, very tolerant, and so what Disney is creating with Zippity Doo Dah and with Song of the South in general is basically saying the second Disney philosophy. You have to look at life and have fun, because if you have no childhood imagination, life is just going to be boring and just a chore.
Yeah, and like you said, this is the message Disney does try to convey in its movies, so I guess you can say Zippity Doo Dah is like their second theme song.
Yeah, think of Song of the South as the precursor to Mary Poppins.
Except in the South, and the story's not, and there's no magic. Well, for the most part.
Well, yeah, he's a sorcerer, but he doesn't actually show that he does magic. But like I said, the Song of the South is almost purposefully boring, I want to say.
Yeah, I guess there wasn't much that they could do, because, I mean, it's pretty much just an old man telling stories, and really the only interesting stuff is during the cartoons, because it's not, none of the characters really, aside from Uncle Remus, are able to hold up the story on their own or make any sort of impact on the audience. But for being the first, mostly live action film by Disney, it's not bad at all. I I think that like I said, it's really a shame that this doesn't get a DVD release because of the controversy surrounding it. So, but it definitely is a film worth watching, worth acknowledging, because it did start a lot of Disney's first like live action sequences. Because up to this point, they were just known for their animation.
Hmm.
So
And it's also very noteworthy for the introduction of Disney philosophy.
mhm. Yep.
Now the next film kind of missed the point a lot. It was basically trying to condense the Make Mine music and the Three Caballeros formula into two different features. And it would tell a story, but have the features be independent of the story. And really, it didn't work. And it missed a lot of the points that, Song of the South made in terms of animation, in terms of, okay, childhood wonder and whatnot. Fun and Fancy Free is mostly just, okay, we're going to take something familiar, Jiminy Cricket. We're going to have him narrate a little bit and showcase the story of Bongo. And Bongo itself is not a very interesting story in any regard.
It's padded to hell.
And bears slapping each other. Yeah.
Yes.
I wish these bears would play a game of disappearing bears.
But then we would end up with even more bears. And then
we transition into Mickey and the Beanstalk in the second half of Fun and Fancy Free.
And I think that cartoon was, I think the whole point of Fun and Fancy Free was to lead up to Mickey and the Beanstalk, because Mickey hadn't appeared in a film since Fantasia, and because of all the war propaganda films that were made, and the lack of cartoons and everything, people were starting to forget about Mickey. So this was sort of Disney's way of bringing him back into the public consciousness. Unfortunately, they didn't have enough budget, or I guess creativity, to make this its own feature-length film, and at the same time, it was too long to be one of their shorts. So I guess they figured, hey, let's just mix this in with, another random short, try to put a story behind it, and then hopefully people will see it.
And as we said, there are a few issues with it. I mean, there's an offensive stereotype, and the story doesn't end the way the original story ends. I mean, it's given a Disney ending, but honestly, it's really weird. It doesn't mesh together, and it kind of sets back the package films in terms of they were starting to get a little bit better with their package films. They were starting to learn, okay, this is how things work, and this just kind of misses the point. The next one, however, Melody Time, did a lot better. It was basically Make Mine music, only done much better. The shorts were better. Mm-hmm. The characters featured were better, and they did a couple of them, like we talked about, Pecos Bill and Johnny Appleseed. They are like really ingrained in our minds today, because I mean, these were famous figures back then. They took the legends and they adapted them, and in a way, they did the same thing that Disney does with books, where they adapt a legend or adapt a concept and they bring it to the film light. Here they took it on a smaller scale, and while the introduction to Pecos Bill was a little bit boring, both stories were very good.
Mhm. Yeah, this was Disney making, short coherent stories, that if you elaborated on a lot more, could be their own feature films, but at the same time they work as little shorts. And whenever people hear about tall tale characters, these are the type of cartoon characters they think of, the Disney ones. So they definitely leave an impact.
And honestly, they're just so much fun. The sheer insanity of Pecos Bill roping a tornado, that is awesome.
Right, and the artistic pieces are even better too.
Like the flight of the bumblebee thing was really good.
Right, it's very loud, very very fast pace. There's constant music, there's lots of colors. And it keeps your attention and, keeps you focused.
And so it shows that with films like The Three Caballeros and Melody Time, they had two distinct concepts. They somewhat missed it the first time, but the second time they tried it, they did it much better. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of, a growing movie-making company needs to do. And while they still couldn't continue to make the animated features that they had before, the fact that they were improving with such a low budget features that they had is, goes to show that Disney, even with the worst material, can still produce something good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they better the formula. They cut out all the boring artistic ones. They made the ones that they did keep in really good, like the tree segment.
And the segments that had stories were much more interesting stories and much more fun.
Mm-hmm. And the characters were, given more personality, more focus, and it made a really interesting package film. It's one that I personally really enjoy.
Now, the next film that they did, however, completely did the opposite. So Dear to My Heart is basically Song of the South, the poor version.
Done wrong.
Yeah, it's basically you take everything that was likable of Song of the South, take it out, take out all the movie structure, take out anything that resembles a film, and just lazy it up. It's the equivalent of a third film in Disney sequels. It's like I can't think of any films that went past 2, but basically the Fox and the Hound 2 of of the live action verse at that time. In fact, seriously, it's not a film in any sense of the word, and the laziness on display makes me hate it even more than The Reluctant Dragon, because The Reluctant Dragon is offensive. I bring it up all the time because of that. However, So Dear to My Heart it fails on the conventional level, it fails on a basic film level, and that's something that a company such as Disney should not be able to do. This is also another case of them adapting a book to film and failing, and that's what Disney doesn't do that. It was adapted from a book called Midnight in Jeremiah, and I can't imagine the book was much better than the movie, but
yeah, this movie is just the epitome of laziness in at this point in time in Disney, because I think this was just what they could make with the budget that they had, and they weren't particularly stoked about making it, and just threw it together just because. And it shows. It is so bad. It is so mind-numbingly boring. But the problem is, it's the type of bad that is forgettable.
It's not something we can constantly bring up and riff. I mean, I'll try to bring it up every time I get, but The Reluctant Dragon is something you can physically get angry over.
Right. Like, The Reluctant Dragon, the good thing about it, the only good thing about it, is that it's fun to make fun of. It's fun to get angry at, because
that
it's
agrees
so
with me.
But So Dear to My Heart, it's just so forgetful. Like I mentioned before, it doesn't even have a DVD release, and there's no existing clip of it outside of, maybe a Netflix thing that probably goes for $1 and maybe some old VHS tapes. But it's something that, you can just shove to the side and forget it ever existed, and it won't change anything in the Disney canon or anything. It's completely worthless.
Now, the next film, and the last film of the 1940s, is actually the best packaged film in my opinion, and it really ends the 1940s on a good note. After we got through like that horrible experience of So Dear to My Heart, this was really, really fun. And it takes a concept that Fun and Fancy Free did, and it does it better. And
much better.
And again, it's another case of them taking what they learned from the previous film and redoing it and doing it better. And they took the Wind in the Willows and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. They made a way. They found a way to make them both work in the same context, and the narration both work in terms of flowing into the next film. And they just had fun with it. And like I said, this is the first case of a Disney villain song in a film. This is Disney just having fun and creating a good Halloween special. And I'd say it is a great, great way to end the decade.
Plus, this showed a bit of a genius on Disney's marketing department. The fact that they made this Halloween themed, because as we learn with films today, like The Grinch, Who Stole Christmas, and Home Alone, like they could be subpar or even terrible films, but if you tack on a holiday, Christmas
or any holiday theme, really,
then you are guaranteed to have it shown every year at that time. Because
it doesn't matter. Like, Hocus Pocus, say what you will about the film, I love it, but it's shown every Halloween.
Like, even Gremlins is shown around Christmas time. So, like I said,
even Die Hard. Die Hard is a film that you wouldn't associate it with it, but it's Christmas.
Exactly. So, like I said, this was their first holiday special, and even though this can stand on its own outside of the holiday association, it's done very well. And the two cartoons, while they are about different things, different people, even different species entirely, they both, have similarities between them, and it kind of makes sense as to why they were packaged together.
And they were both very well-selling books, especially at the time, and so, it makes sense to adapt them. It makes sense. Even if they weren't children's stories necessarily, they were stories that everyone had heard of.
Right, and while it is a shame that in the case of Mr. Toad, where instead of getting a full-length Wind in the Willows version, we only got a partial one and just focusing on the story of Mr. Toad, for what it is, it does it really well, and it's very memorable. It's whenever people think of Wind in the Willows, that's one of the first things that they think of.
And so that is the 1940s. Those are all the films that we have covered. We talked about them each in succession briefly, and what I gathered from just talking about these back to back is that Disney is very good at bouncing back from failures. That's the first thing to note. This decade itself is not the best decade in Disney history. It was them starting out. They had some really clever footing. They had really good films. And then the films that didn't take off made him create more. He didn't deal with failure right. He was just like, okay, I need to create something better, something more creative. And so he did Fantasia. And unfortunately, that led to some failure. But after that, he bounced back and he realized his mistakes. And the same thing happened even during the package film era, where the second half of the 1940s may not be that good or that memorable, but with each failure, with each okay film like Saludos Amigos, he made a film that was more a spiritual successor to that and did it better.
Yep, and despite, their difficulties, what with the war and their lack of animation team and everything, I mean, they could have easily just, given up, declared bankruptcy, just pretty much wait till the war was over and then, maybe try to pick back up. But they just kept going. They kept going, and while they didn't exactly produce the best material, they still did what they could, and it definitely shows.
I mean, even in the cases like The Reluctant Dragon and So Dear to My Heart that we've seen, Disney has always been really good, especially showing in this decade, about dealing with failure and learning from mistakes. And so while the 1940s may not be the best decade in Disney history. It did give us some really amazing films, and it did showcase that Disney is a force to be reckoned with. It refused to go away. It refused to bow out. It always learned from its mistakes, except for So Dear to My Heart, but, everyone makes a mistake. And it paved the way for the 1950s.
Yep. And that would begin Disney's, I guess you'd call it, golden age.
Pretty much. The 1950s is the golden age of their animation history in terms of stuff you remember. I mean, we all remember Snow White and Pinocchio and Dumbo and Bambi and stuff like that, but the real films that we've all seen come from the 1950s.
Mm-hmm. So we have fans like Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan,
Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have also these classic, campy films like Davy Crockett and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Treasure Island and stuff like Old Yeller, stuff that, we remember Disney for, especially years down the line.
Mm-hmm. So we definitely have a lot to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. Overall, not the best decade, like we said, but it still showed what Disney was capable of.
Because we could call it the experimental period.
Yeah, 1930s, 40s is experimental. And now, for the part that you have all been waiting for, it is time for the Disney Awards ceremony for the decade. Mm-hmm. But before we get too deep into that, we have the counts, the official Disney death count, and other tallies. So if you would kindly bring up the sheet, Kat.
All right, got it right here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, so like we said, we've been keeping tabs on a few things, things that Disney is known for, and that...
Disney cliches somewhat, or,
Yeah, you could say that.
Mm-hmm.
So these are characters, that, a lot of typical Disney films have, like princesses, princes, and villains.
Mm-hmm.
So far, we have one Disney princess,
which is in the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, so technically did not happen and, did not have anything to do with this decade.
Right,
so,
but, I mean, she was the first Disney princess. We have to add it in there. I mean,
yeah.
Snow White was the one that started it all. How could we ignore it? And then we have two Disney princes. Now,
the first one obviously is in Snow White.
Yeah, the one who shows up 5 minutes at the beginning and 5 minutes at the end.
However, the one that we remember is Bambi.
Mm-hmm.
You forget that he's known as the Prince of the Forest. His father is the Great Elk.
Yeah, the Great Prince of the Forest.
Yeah.
And true, while they're not, official, human royalty, they still have the title. They're still revered as royalty, so I personally count it.
And he has the same responsibility. And, to talk a little bit about Bambi, too, it showcases a little bit more about the responsibility that the prince faced. While we didn't really talk too much about Bambi 2, since it's not part of this decade, Bambi 2 does a lot of things right in showcasing a lot of, a continuation of what Bambi was all about.
Yeah, so, Bambi 2, while there is a lot more dialogue and a few more exciting things happen, and it's not so much focused on the nature part of it, or just, the general abstract idea of following the life of a deer, it still is very enjoyable to watch, particularly out of all the Disney sequels that would come out in the 2000 era. So it definitely gets an honorable mention.
Mm-hmm. And, it just continues this idea that Bambi is a prince. It showcases all the princely duties he's going to have to perform once his father is no longer in the picture. And, just having Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart, he has this aura of a great prince about him. And, that further proves that Bambi is a great prince. So.
Right. I mean, feel free to disagree if you'd like, because I know some people are going to say, oh, he's not an official prince, he doesn't have a crown, or da-da-da, but this is our general opinion, and we do count him as a prince.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that, and then we move on to our villains. Now,
We had quite a few villains, actually, which surprised me because the package era didn't have many.
yeah, and some of it was kind of tricky, because certain characters we couldn't figure out if we really should count them as villains or not, or if we should just count them as, sidekicks or whatever. But but for the ones that we did agree upon, we do, as an official count, have the lucky number 13. So that's 13 Disney villains from the 40s. So, moving on from that, we now get up to the grisly part of the count.
The count that you have all been waiting for.
The official Disney character death count.
The Disney death that, Disney made popular in the film Bambi. Bambi's mom was the first not on screen, but the first, death of a main character in a Disney property that wasn't a villain. And so, that was a very memorable moment. And the killing continued from there. So, would you like to rattle off the numbers, Kat?
Sure. Well, some of these deaths were debatable, in the fact that they were left kind of
ambiguous,
particularly in the case of Ichabod Crane. But from what we gathered, and I know this might baffle some people, but we did count a few background characters that had visibly died either off-screen or were, referenced off-screen.
Mm-hmm.
So the official...
Right. The last time we talked about it, we had an 8.5 for the official count, and that's because we had missed one character and we didn't count one thing before. But the official count is
10.5 character deaths.
Now, this is somewhat, some of it is consolidation. Like we said in the case of Little Toot, we took the amount of people who must have died because of that boat crashing, and we counted as one official death because it wasn't particularly stated. In the case of Ichabod,
right,
it was 0.5.
Right, because with Ichabod, you don't know if he is dead or not. You don't know if, Brom Bones really did dress up and then, killed him and hid his body, or whether he just scared him off and he was living in some other village, or even that the Headless Horseman actually was real and dragged him down to hell. No, none of this is made official, but seeing as, Ichabod was never heard from again, I guess we can safely assume that, he probably is dead. So, thus the 0.5 count.
So 10.5 in a decade. So that's an average of one a year.
Yes. And one other death, as opposed to the 10.5 mostly innocent character deaths, we also have one villain death. And it happened in the very first movie with the death of the Wicked Queen /
And that's the only villain that, up until this point, has died in Disney canon. They've been very kind.
Yeah, abnormally kind to their villains. Yeah, it's very... I know they're going to make up for this later, but still, it is unusually kind to them. And not only that, but she died of good old-fashioned gravity.
Yep.
I guess
it always gets me down.
Boo. So that is the official character death count, and we were going to keep a song count, but since there are just so many songs,
yeah,
we decided to just keep it down to the ones people are most interested in, which is the villain song.
Yep, that's a film that everyone goes towards.
Yes. But strangely enough, despite the villains that we've had, there's only been one villain song in that entire decade.
And that was for the Headless Horseman, which is arguably, he's arguably the best Disney villain in this decade.
Yeah, definitely the most terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, he's something that, Disney really put their heart and soul into animating, and, it comes across really well as especially like a really well closer to the decade where you have the first Disney villain song, and it's very memorable, especially with Bing Goddamn Crosby.
Oh, yes. The man who can make women's panties melt.
And is that the end to our count, Kat?
Yep, I think that's what we've been keeping track of so far. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
anybody thinks that we should be keeping track of other things, things that, would be just as interesting to look out for, leave a comment, and we'll definitely add it into the next retrospective we do.
Mm-hmm. And we will be continuing the counts that we have set up.
Mm-hmm.
And now, let us go into the awards. Can I get a drum roll, please, Kat?
Boom, 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 boom.
All right, the first thing we're going to give out is the award for the best acid trip sequence. And now, every Disney film, as we've shown, has had an acid trip in some way, shape, or form, excluding, of course, The Reluctant Dragon and Victory Through Air Power. But just their existence is an acid trip, so we're gonna,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
We're just gonna ignore that.
But this award is for the acid trip sequence that is most recognizable, leaves the most impact, and is the most fun. Those were kind of the criteria I was looking at. And so we personally thought that the best acid trip sequence was the Three Caballeros. The entire second half of the Three Caballeros is an acid trip. And it's all very memorable, it's very insane, and it's very fun. What do you think, Kat?
I love it. I absolutely love it. True, it starts off normal enough, with just, Donald opening his presents, but then all of a sudden he's shrinking down, he's going into a book, then he's growing big again, then he's transitioning through time and space, going through pictures, flying around.
And then dancing cactuses and your cacti.
Then he just goes through space and turns into a flower.
Space.
Yes. And like I said, it slowly descends into madness. And while it may be infuriating to some people, because, again, this is an acid trip, and it defies all forms of logic and physics, but just to watch everything descend into what it becomes, it's so enjoyable.
So that's what we thought of as our personal best, our personal favorite, if you will. But we did have an honorable mention.
Our honorable mention would be the pink elephants.
And now, most people in the polls, as we saw, have listed the pink elephants as their favorite. And certainly, this is an amazing sequence. Don't get me wrong. This is very memorable. It's one of the best parts of Dumbo. And it's really, really well done in a film that, kind of gets rid of all filler. It's a filler sequence that really works, and it's very transfixing in a way. But the thing is, it's not as long as the Three Caballeros sequence, and honestly, I don't think it gets quite as insane as the Three Caballeros does at times.
Yeah, because, it does lead up to this whole big, gangbang raping of your senses, as Nostalgia Critic could put it. But at the same time, it happens so suddenly, and then it ends so suddenly. But it's always the same thing. It's the pink, black-eyed demons that are just doing stuff in the black void. And also another thing, whereas the Three Caballeros, watching the acid sequence, is fun and somewhat enjoyable, and it gets more goofy and exaggerated. In the case of the pink elephants, depending on your perspective, it can actually be pretty scary.
Yeah, some parts are kind of terrifying. I'm I don't know what to feel. There's elephants with elephants on their naval places and stuff like that. It's very weird. And it's trippy, and it is a lot of fun, but at the same time, some people might not have the best trip with this.
Plus, as it was mentioned before, it's a big-lipped alligator moment. And as we all know, those things appear suddenly, then disappear suddenly, and then are never referenced again.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, with cases like that, depending on how, good or bad it is, a big-lipped alligator moment can be, it could range from, just padding of a film to balls to the wall insanity. And this one, while it does, it is like that. A lot of the times when I talk to people about Dumbo, they don't particularly remember it just for the pink elephant scene. They remember it for Dumbo.
And it's not like the game breaker. If the pink elephants were taken out of the equation, you could still watch Dumbo. However, if the acid trip sequence in the Three Caballeros was taken out, you'd lose a lot of the film, and it wouldn't be as fun. That is why we picked the Three Caballeros as the best acid trip sequence. Feel free to disagree with our opinions, but that is the award we are giving.
Mm-hmm. So, next category, I guess, would be Best Song.
Yep.
Now, one thing I want to mention is that, unlike later categories we get to, we don't have a Best Worst for this category, just because, what constitutes a bad song could be a lot of things, and once again, like we said, there's so many songs in these films that it's hard to really pick out what is especially bad.
And especially a lot of them aren't just, bad, they're somewhat boring, which is...
Yeah, or forgettable.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided to just look at the best songs, because, again, that's what people remember.
Mm-hmm.
So, and between the two of us, we pretty much agreed that the best song is Zippity Doo Dah.
And now, the reason we really thought this was because Zippity Doo Dah, as I stated before, fully embraces the philosophy that Disney was representing at the time and even today about, just taking your troubles and making everything so much better. And it reminds me a lot of the Mary Poppins song, A Spoonful of Sugar, and the fact that, it takes something that's supposed to be tedious and boring and makes it so much fun. Your average, ordinary life and every day-to-day happenings may not be that exciting, but just sing Zippity Doo Dah and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And even in a film that was so forgettable or so,
critically panned
as this continues to thrive to this day. And everyone remembers Zippity Doo Dah.
I've heard elementary school children, sing it in their choir. So it's definitely still memorable, and it's a generally happy song. And of course they've adapted it, had it sung by different people, but the general tone is just like, hey, it's a wonderful day. It's something that you can whistle on your way to wherever it is you're going.
Like, it's a wonderful day for pie. Seriously. Just it makes every day-to-day action just so much more fun. Now, the general consensus for everyone else, however, was a little bit different.
Yeah, this one, once again, we have to disagree with the fans. Again, it's, personal taste. But a lot of the fans voted for When You Wish Upon a Star. And to be honest, it's not that hard to see why everyone would think of that, since it is pretty much Disney's theme song.
I attribute it as the second most remembered theme song of the 40s in terms of how they marketed it and how they pushed it, especially in later years. But I think, personally, When You Wish Upon a Star is more prominent in the 50s. Its message is more used there, where we have Cinderella and we have Peter Pan and all these, yes, we have the Zippity Doo Dah message, but at the same time it's more childish wonder and timeless thunder and, stuff like that.
Right, so, and plus, a lot of, once again, it's the controversy surrounding it, saying that, all you have to do is wish upon a star and your dreams will come true. That sort of naivety. So, that is kind of, it does kind of hurt it. It hurts the message, because it doesn't elaborate on, what you should do aside from wishing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they showcased in Pinocchio, yes, he was a good person and he earned the right to wish upon the star, but it doesn't delve too deep into it. So that's why we definitely associate with this with Disney. This is definitely a great song, but honestly, it's not in our pick. However, we do have an honorable mention for Baby Mine from Dumbo.
Yeah, this definitely gets an honorable mention in just how much, power it has, and how much emotion it makes you feel. Because this is sung during a point where a young baby elephant was forcibly separated from his mother. And this is like the first time in God knows how long that he was finally able to see her. And even then, he can't really see her. And she can't really touch him. The most they can do is, touch trunks. And she can only, cradle him in her trunk.
And the powerfulness of this song is the fact that how it's used. And a lot of the other songs on this list, it's mostly a reactionary song where it's not like the typical Disney thing where you have the main character up and singing it like, I just can't wait to be king. That's a typical Disney song, but with stuff like Zippity Doo-Dah, actually that's a bad example. Well, with When You Wish Upon a Star, that's not the main character singing it. When You Wish Upon a Star is a chorus that's led into it, stuff like that. And so it's not your typical Disney song, but Baby Mine is somewhat closer in the fact that it has this scene, and the scene and the song mesh up. And it's really, really memorable for being one of the first, Disney songs to really do a montage like this and make you physically cry because everyone else in this cartoon is crying. And then you have the rat starting to cry, and he's just like, "Oh, Dumbo," and it's a great scene, and it's a combination of the scene and the song that makes it so memorable for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me cry every time. Yeah, and for anybody who's ever, lost a child or, had to be separated from their parents for whatever reason, it really hits home.
So these are our picks. Like I said, it's all opinion, but you feel free to disagree. But this is what we think. Mm-hmm. Next is best and worst packaged film.
Okay, so the general consensus on this, we kind of agreed on two picks for this because one film is kind of an entire film in its own right, and the other one, again, is, sort of a typical package film. And in this case, we decided to pick Fantasia and The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I elevate Fantasia to a higher status than a package film, but it is a package film. It has a bunch of different shorts combined together. That's essentially what a package film is. But it does something very, very different with these segments than the rest of the package films. So I kind of separate it. But in terms of best, Fantasia is the epitome of what a package film should be. And then when you're looking at it just on their own merits in terms of storytelling and whatnot, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad beats everything else out. I mean, it's a completely different experience than Fantasia, of course, but it beats everything else out, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and they're two stories that both work well together and independently of each other. And, they tell good, coherent stories and have good, strong, likable characters. So it definitely earns its place in, the best package film, in my opinion. Much better than the rest of the stuff we've looked at beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the audience? What did they have to say for theirs?
I believe the general consensus was about the same. For the most part, people did agree, Fantasia, Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Crane. Ichabod and Mr. Toad, I'm sorry. Yeah, pretty much the general consensus was that. I think maybe one or two people liked maybe Make My Music or Melody Time. And I can sort of see it, based on a few individual clips. But for the most part, as a whole package thing, I don't think they really hold up to either Fantasia or Ichabod and Mr. Toad.
Yeah, I have to agree. I have to agree in a lot of that respect.
So next is our worst package film. And Our pick for that was Fun and Fancy Free.
And just on a fundamental level, this doesn't work. It doesn't mesh it doesn't mesh coherently as a story like it's trying to do. It doesn't work as an independent package film. Like individually, the segments themselves aren't that good, and they're somewhat infuriating in terms of bear slapping, and it doesn't work on many different levels, and it's misguided. It feels like they were trying to do two completely different things. They were trying to combine Melody Time and the Three Caballeros, and they were trying to make that work, and it just didn't.
No, it does not. Because really, the only noteworthy thing is Mickey and the Beanstalk, but that could be a whole thing on its own.
Without the puppets, without the MST3K wannabes.
Yes, without any of that, with different narration, which it has gotten, in later years. So, but you take all that away, and this is a very disjointed, very dysfunctional package film that really should not have been made the way it was. So, that is why we give it that way, and that's why we kind of rated under films that, like, say, Saludos Amigos. Because while the film is bad and it's generally just cartoons mixed with, vacation footage, it at least had a similar theme going to it. It all took place in South America, for the most part. And
it was for a different purpose. It was political film, and it was not your typical film.
Right, and even something like Make Mine Music, despite the fact that it had boring artistic pieces and somewhat okay, somewhat not okay, coherent storylines, it still, for the most part, had a similar theme. So once again, and Fun and Fancy Free just doesn't follow anything, and that's why we rate it as such.
Mm-hmm. And what about the fans? What do they have to say?
The fans, for the most part, agree with us with Fun and Fancy Free, and I think a few of them said Make My Music or Saludos Amigos, and again, like I said, understandable. But again, I give my reasons for why I think that they rate a little bit higher than Fun and Fancy Free. But for the most part, it is Fun and Fancy Free is considered among the worst, as rightfully it should be.
Yeah, I have to agree. It really just sucks.
Like I said, just watch Mickey and the Beanstalk on its own. Save yourself the frustration.
And now let us go to Best Worst Live Action Movie. Pretty simple one, and I think the fans really agreed with us on this one more than most, is the fact that the best is Song of the South, and the worst is So Dear to My Heart, and they're the only two live-action films on the list.
Pretty much.
But I think we can agree that, even if it wasn't the two of them, even if there was a different category, they would probably win best and worst regardless.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Because, while Song of the South, like you said, it is boring, and it does drag in a lot of parts, you still have the fun of watching Uncle Remus, listening to his story, seeing the cartoons of and the stories of Brer Rabbit and all that. It's still enjoyable to watch, and at least it has, a plot and something driving the story, and, stuff actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed to So Dear to My Heart, where nothing happens, the characters...
And it's lazy as shit.
Yeah, and the characters are unlikable or forgettable, and the whole moral is just, thrown out the door. So, it's basically, like we said, it's the bad version of Song of the South, whereas Song of the South is the best of Song of the South.
So those are our best and worst live-action films. And now, before we get into our final category, there are a couple things I want to do. First of all, I want to give my opinion on the best Disney villain of the decade. We didn't include that as a category because it's kind of different when we have a lot of villains that aren't really memorable. But if I was to say the best villain of the best Disney villain of the 1940s, I would have to go with Headless Horseman.
I do agree. The fact that, again, it's the Headless Horseman. He's a demon on a horse straight out of hell with a flaming pumpkin head. I mean, how much more awesome of a costume could you get?
And he's the only villain to actually accomplish his goals. Well, other than Winky in The Wind in the Willows. But the thing is, Winky gets his comeuppance.
Yeah, in this case, Headless Horseman just shows up, yells a lot, chases down Ichabod, and then presumably drags him down to hell.
And so we don't know what happens, but the thing is, he gets a lot more done than a lot of the villains on our list. And, in the case of Snow White Queen, she doesn't get anything accomplished. She poisons someone, that's it.
And even then, it didn't work.
Yeah, it didn't work. She transformed herself into a hag, but that's it. And pretty much, the villains in Pinocchio, they did do things, but the only person that was really villainous was the coachman, and he didn't kill anyone. He turned kids into donkeys, but
well, presumably the kids probably did die eventually from being overworked and starved and working in dark, cold coal mines.
We'll make him an honorable mention.
Yeah, that guy scares me beyond all reason.
Scared beyond all reason? That's Yzma.
Yeah, I definitely would count the coachman, though, as one of the most terrifying villains, right next to the Headless Horseman. And the fact that, he's pretty much an everyday guy. A lot of people don't even remember him because he just looks, so normal. But then you see him talking about his plan to kidnap children and turn them into donkeys and then sell them into slavery, and he turns into the frickin' devil!
Yeah.
Oh my God!
It's creepy. It's like that one pic during the Care Bears thing where if you freeze it, he, loses eyes or something like that.
Yeah, he's
weird.
He's the guy that parents warn their children about, and you would never think it because of how normal he looks.
Tommy Wiseau? Well, hi, doggy.
So, yeah, in my personal opinion, I would make the coachman probably the most terrifying and efficient villain just because he is able to get away with everything he does. Even though Pinocchio is lucky enough to escape that fate, he doesn't tell anybody about it. No help is sent, and for all we know, he kept on kidnapping children for the rest of his days, turning them into donkeys. And, that pretty much is it. He's one of the first, examples of, a human trafficker that we've probably ever seen in an animated film.
I can see that, and I can see definitely the ramifications about that, but I think, personally, my pick is for the Headless Horseman, just for sheer intimidation factor, the fact that he's so ambiguous and mysterious, and he just comes up, and he's like, booga, 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 and, stupid dog, you made me look bad, and, yeah.
Right, I do agree with you, but then again, I still would go with that, the coachman, just for the reasons I stated.
And the other villains, I mean, there's certain villains we didn't mention, like Man and Bambi and stuff like that, but for the most part, they aren't as memorable. So, I mean, and honestly, this isn't an award we're giving out. This is kind of our favorites, our opinions.
Yeah, acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm. So, before we get into our final category, do you want to give the audience pick for the best and worst animated feature film?
Sure thing. All right, so I counted the polls and everything. I looked at general opinion, and there was a lot of differing ones. Definitely a good general consensus on what people liked and didn't like, and a lot of it was similar. And a lot of it was similar to picks from other categories. I think that the most voted film, the one that everyone has been saying for the best animation, is Fantasia.
For the most part, I mean, there were a few here and there, but yeah, I
did allow multiple picks and everything, but it seemed like a lot of people really did like Fantasia, and in truth, how could you not pick it as the best animated film? It's the best example there is of a wonderfully animated film.
Mm-hmm. And their pick of the worst.
Well,
It was.
Well, I still have other best ones to mention.
Ah, okay.
And as for other favorites, I mean, other people mentioned, liking Pinocchio, liking Dumbo, which is understandable since they're very memorable. And then, a few other package films, surprisingly. And of course, like we mentioned before, a lot of people really like Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And again, it's understandable because it's a great package film. It's a holiday film.
And it's one of their, it's a really good animated film in many regards.
Mm-hmm. So those are the best, and I do generally agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as for the worst, I think it was, pretty much unanimous with a lot of people.
Except for a
choice few.
Yeah.
And the worst definitely is Reluctant Dragon.
Yeah, many people have picked the Reluctant Dragon as the worst, and you can definitely see it, especially how many times I mention it all the time.
Yeah, for a film that I really have little memory of watching, now that I have watched it, the sheer, size of how much is wrong with it, how extraordinarily bad it is, especially compared to its predecessor Fantasia, just, makes it rightfully the worst thing to ever come out in that decade.
And it gets a further impact because we saw it right after Fantasia. We got the best and the worst in 5 minutes, and it was like a whirl of what the hellery.
Yeah, and it's not just the cartoon itself that bad, but the sequence leading up to it with the live action, the tour of Disney Studios, I mean, it could be interesting if it was made into its own thing and it wasn't packaged with this and the cartoons and everything. But the build-up was just meh.
And there was little payoff.
Yeah, the whole film is a mess. There's no doubt about it, and it rightfully deserves to be in the worst spot, no doubt.
No.
No, we've had other picks as well. A lot of good ones too. People also pick Saludos Amigos.
And So Dear to My Heart was referenced. A couple of people have voted for different ones. One person even voted for Bambi, unfortunately, but I disagree strongly. I can see why this person voted for Bambi. But honestly, in terms of worse than the Reluctant Dragon, I don't know. No.
And of course, all the package films got a vote too. Make My Music, Fun and Fancy Free, and it's like I said, generally understandable. Some of them have good qualities about it. A lot of them have worser qualities.
And for us, we decided we couldn't just pick one for best and worst. We narrowed it down to our top 3 and our bottom 3.
Okay, so I guess I'll start with my personal best and worst. And this may be a bit surprising and a bit predictable. But a lot of you may end up hating me. But my best goes as follows. Number 3 is Dumbo, because Dumbo is adorable. Number 2 is Fantasia, because it's a wonderful artistic piece. It's a masterpiece. It's just wonderful, as a whole. And number 1 is The Three Caballeros. Now, I know...
Say what?
Now, I know you're all going to hate me. But the thing is, when I was growing up, I watched pretty much all of these films. And as a kid, watching both Fantasia and The Three Caballeros together, Three Caballeros managed to keep my attention much, much more than Fantasia did. And it may have been, my young, prepubescent mind and the fact that I have ADHD, not, causing me to not fully appreciate Fantasia as it is. But for the most part, some sequences just couldn't hold my attention, and there are sequences in it that I generally do not like still, even as an adult. And with the case of Three Caballeros, I mean, you know, there's always stuff going on. There's so much vibrant color and energy and memorable characters, memorable music. And I know a lot of people would disagree with me about that, you know, it's too loud, it's too obnoxious, it's too, you know, crazy as a whole, and it doesn't know what to be. But for the most part, I really am generally fond of Three Caballeros. It's what I grew up with. It's what I'm very nostalgic for. So that is my personal pick. And like I said, feel free to disagree, you know, even, you know, bash me a bit if you want, but that's what I picked, and I'm not changing it.
I, however, am the good cop in this situation.
Yes.
I have the more widely acceptable picks.
Yes. For Dave's pick, his best, number 3, like me, he picked Dumbo.
Mm-hmm.
Again.
Because I've seen an elephant fly.
Have you ever seen a superfly?
I've seen a housefly. I've seen Marty McFly. But I ain't ever seen American Pie.
You don't need to. So anyway, that's number 3. Number 2 is Bambi.
Mm-hmm.
Which I know David told you all about why he loves that film.
Yeah, I've talked about it a lot. Basically, the fact is, it's about life, and it's one of those intellectual things with me. I always read a lot into these kinds of creative films, and this one has a very special place in my heart, especially because, you know, I viewed it a lot as a child. And it gave root to Patrick Stewart as the Great Prince of the Forest, goddammit. Woo-hoo. A prince has said woo-hoo in this.
Yes. Awesome. And then, of course, number 1, you pretty much know what that is.
Yep. Fantasia. Mm-hmm. Need I say more?
Exactly. And
yeah.
again, you know, it's just a wonderful film. You know, say what you will, say that, you know, oh, it doesn't follow the Disney formula, that the classic music is boring or whatever, but you can't deny it's definitely a masterpiece.
It is Disney's, like, claim to fame, especially in the 40s, where, you know, he was doing so many different things. Like, Snow White wasn't his masterpiece. This was. And that is saying a lot, you know, considering all the problems he went through getting Snow White up on the screen. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's our top 3 for best. Now, Kat, what is your bottom 3? Your worst?
All right, so for this, I'm actually going to start from the top and work my way down, just because, you know, yours and mine are pretty similar except for one. So I'd say the number 1 worst one is So Dear to My Heart.
And we're agreed on this.
Yes.
Now, say what you want about The Reluctant Dragon. You know, it is offensive. It is whatever, but it is still so much fun to make fun of. This has no qualities that can be taken as good. It fails in every single standpoint, a filmmaking standpoint, a writing standpoint, structure, character, music, exposition, animation, every single standpoint it completely fails at. Sean Faust would be all over this with epic fails.
Exactly, and hence why for both our number 2s is Reluctant Dragon. But as you
you could probably guess that.
Exactly, because again, you know, like we said, So Dear to My Heart rates above it, and that the fact it's so boring and forgettable that, unlike The Reluctant Dragon, there's really no fun in making fun of it.
But The Reluctant Dragon does not agree with us.
No, it
at
does
all.
Not. Mm-mm.
And that gay dragon, when he shows up in our Who Framed Roger Rabbit review, eventually,
we will have Nerf guns ready.
Yes,
and
we will be like, no, wait, stop the presses. The Reluctant Dragon's here. We have to stop the review.
Be like, nope, that didn't exist. Nope.
nope. Fun and fancy free reference.
And speaking of which, that's when we get to the third category, the third place in the worst. And this is where you and I disagreed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll just do ours at the same time, because, again, it's very similar. But for your worst, you put Fun and Fancy Free.
Bears! I'll get you next time, Bears.
Yes.
This isn't over. Bears!
Obligatory bear quote.
Bear.
So, yes, that was your third worst. My third worst, however, was Victory Through Air Power. Now, the reason I say this is that yes, Fun and Fancy Free is bad. It's a disjointed, horrible mess of a package film. But the only saving grace in it is Mickey and the Beanstalk, which is a personal favorite cartoon of mine. You know, I really like that one. And, you know, like I said, on its own, it could be great. Now, the difference is with Victory Through Air Power, while the beginning is interesting and, you know, fun to watch, because there is a few funny moments and everything, it is just so dated, and it is, like, educational to the point of boring at parts that...
You must use airplanes!
Yes,
Nothing else! Snowflame demands it! Snowflame will get the bronies to kick your ass if you do not use airplanes.
And the fact that it hammers in that point so much, it makes you feel like you're in class. It is basically an educational piece. And, again, a dated one at that. Because I personally watch films to be entertained. And, you know, occasionally educated, not to be lectured at. So, Victory Through Air Power, like I said, after I watched it the first time, I said, yeah, I'm done. I don't need to ever see this again. I could just say that I watched it and leave it at that.
But then you watched it again with me because I hadn't seen it.
Yeah, because you're an asshole.
In fact, every movie that we've seen past maybe Dumbo, we watched together.
Yeah.
She watched twice.
Yeah. One thing a lot of you don't know is that I like to have different opinions. So I will watch the film first, but since I can't watch it on my own because my general nostalgia of certain films tends to overshadow my opinion on certain things, I usually watch it with, you know, friends or my boyfriend, and then they give me an outside perspective.
And then she watches it again with me, and a lot of the time...
He can't do anything on his own.
Hey, shut up. And most of the time, these are films that I haven't seen before, so I'm going into it in a very blind perspective, and then I like to have Kat as the person who's seen the film, you know, going into it. She kind of knows what's going on, and I can kind of get a general consensus from her, and then we're going to see if we agree at the end of the film. And that's kind of how we do things. I usually like to let it stew for like a day or two before we do the cast, because I don't want my initial reaction and my initial opinions to cloud things.
Right. And this way you get a more balanced review. I mean, you have Dave, who at this point mostly is the newcomer, you know, just experiencing all these Disney films. And then you have me, you know...
Seasoned veteran.
Yes. The person
who's seen these films much more than I have.
Yeah, who grew up on this stuff and knows...
She even told me that she knows about this obscure film called The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes. I'm like, what the fuck, Disney? What the fuck?
Yeah, so I have a much more deeper knowledge, and I'm a much more bigger fangirl than he is, so...
She's my Disney buff.
Yes, I'm the Disney buff, so... This is how we work together. This is how we come up with our opinions and general consensus, for those of you who ever wondered.
But anyway, guys, that was the 1940s. Our best, our worst, our counts, our retrospective on the decade. And now, after the experimental decade and the starter year, we have the golden age of Disney. So next week, we are going to launch right into Cinderella.
Yay!
And this is where Disney classics thrive, and I'm very excited. I can't wait. We're going to watch Cinderella right after this cast. I can't wait.
Mm-hmm. And just like we did with Bambi, we're also going to be reviewing its sequels. So...
No!
Yes, we're going to be reviewing Cinderella 2 and Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time. So...
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So, like I said, we will get to those in sequential, and then after that, we launch headfirst, full-blown into the 1950s.
I will say this, however, and as far as the Disney sequels we have seen so far, Bambi 2, the Disney sequels haven't been that bad.
Yet.
But we are going to get started with the 1950s next week. Also, for those of you wondering, yes, each retrospective will be a bit longer than our normal podcast. This has run about 2 hours now. So, yeah, we're going to generally keep that up. I think a good retrospective of the decade and then a good award ceremony would be good for everything.
And seeing as, the later on we get, obviously there's going to be a lot more films, so we might end up dividing it at the halfway point, like early parts of the 80s, later parts of the 90s, something like that, just so we don't have too many films to overwhelm us and, make us stretch our brains to remember every single detail.
Mm-hmm. So look forward to that, guys. But get ready for Cinderella. Mm-hmm. Anyway, this has been the 1940s retrospective of the Disney debate. If you have any comments, criticisms, suggestions, or Disney movie suggestions for, stuff that Disney has distributed but not mainly produced, as we don't have a full list of the distributed features, please contact us and let us know, and we will, we will talk about it. You can contact us at zenithrule.blip.tv in the comments thread, or if you don't want to do that, you can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/zenithrule or twitter.com/EphraimTRabbit. And if you don't want to follow us on Twitter or don't like Twitter or don't even have a Twitter, you can always find us on Facebook. Everyone has a Facebook, and you can find us at facebook.com/zenithrule and facebook.com/catmac. Or go to the Disney Debate fan page at facebook.com/Disney Debate. Just look us up. We have all the reviews posted up there. And your polls and votes do count towards the show. We like reviewers. We like viewer suggestions.
Yeah, we love opinions. Even if they are different from our own, even if they are a bit weird, definitely, let us know. And we're always interested to learn about what others think.
And honestly, we do use it in the video. Like, we did put your opinion in the video, and we will give shout-outs if you want them, so let us know. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. I am Zenith Rule. This is my co-host,
Kat Mac /EphraimTRabbit/Kat T Critic.
And we will catch you on the flip-flop later.
TTFN, ta-ta for now.
Thank you for watching the Media Meltdown. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more awesome videos. And if you like what you see, show your support on the Patreon page at patreon.com/Media Meltdown. See you all next time on the Media Meltdown.